Let me just give a few of the details of that event before I read the story. It was the second season of Chautauqua Institution, 1875. So Chautauqua had opened the year before, and I think most of you probably know, at least in a sketchy or brief form, the history of the opening of Chautauqua Institution. It was the brainstorm of John Vincent, Methodist pastor who became a bishop in the Methodist Church, and a Mr. Lewis, who was an inventor and a commercial man. And they got together to open this place as a campground for the teaching. You know, there's a big religious, a big sort of moral value, like we talk about today, aspect to the religion of the 19th century. And they wanted to open up this camp for the teaching of Sunday school teachers, teach Sunday school teachers what ought to be taught in their Sunday schools. And it opened with a flourish, but it was John Vincent who had the idea to promote Chautauqua and promote the reputation of Chautauqua by inviting sitting President Ulysses Grant to visit for the second season. And John Vincent had a previous connection with Ulysses Grant. Had resigned his military commission before the Civil War and had returned to his home in Illinois. And he was clerking in his father's dry goods store. You know this from the memoirs. And he was drinking then, and he was in a sort of a low state of low condition. And his pastor at that point was this John Vincent. And John Vincent sort of guided him and kept him under control, at least the story we have. And then the two reconnected. So when John Vincent sent the invitation to Grant to come to Chautauqua Institution, he accepted. And he came on the railroad. He came into Jamestown from the east, from Washington, on the railroad. And, well, actually, he might have been in New York, because this was in August 1875, and came to Jamestown and was hosted here by Alonzo Kent in this building, in what is now the dining room, the meeting room, where the new portrait of Robert Jackson is hanging. That was where the party was, the luncheon was, and you can expect that it was an extravagant luncheon. And after that, they proceeded on steamboats up to Chautauqua Institution for Grant to visit and to be hosted and to be feted up there. Action of my story has to do with the relationship between Reuben Fenton and Ulysses Grant, who were colleagues in the Republican Party. And Reuben Fenton was senator at that time. He was senator for one 6-year term until 70 to 76. And the most prominent politician, certainly in Western New York, he had been the governor. And he expected to be the host for Ulysses Grant when Grant came. But Grant refused to be hosted by Reuben Fenton because they were feuding politically. And the reason for the feud will come out in the stories. The luster on the commander-in-chief's reputation had tarnished even before the end of the first term. Radical policy had escalated violence in the South. Ambition, aggravated by greed, ruled the halls of government. The president blithely rewarded flatterers with political appointments. The conduct of the government was scandalous. For the canvass, Senator Fenton aligned with the liberals. Senator Fenton wrote the Journal, that's the Jamestown Journal, has elected to attack the party from the outside. The liberal movement, while rightfully pointing to the need for reform, has injured the Republican cause. The senator declares the supremacy of Republican principles of paramount importance, yet acts in a manner tending to Democratic success. The liberal defection is entirely personal. Precisely, thought the senator. The person must be held to account for the corruption of the principles. Removal of the president from office was necessary to restore public confidence. The movement failed abysmally. In convention in Cincinnati, the liberals nominated Mr. Horace Greeley to oppose the president. Liberal success depended upon wide support from the Democrats. Mr. Greeley, outspoken editor of the New York Tribune, had fashioned a career out of castigating the Democratic Party. The papers ridiculed the liberals' choice. The president was reelected in a landslide. Immediately after the election, the unfortunate Mr. Greeley, never altogether coherent, contracted brain fever and died a madman. Residual mortification obsessed the governor. Not that he felt in any way personally to blame. It was the collected folly of the liberals that effected Mr. Greeley's nomination. Senator Fenton was shocked at the news of the poor man's death. The poor man's grotesque lunatic image still rose at times in his dream. The newspapers expressed appropriate regret and noted confirmation of the candidate's imbalance. The radicals savored the liberals' humiliation. It was the Reverend Dr. Vincent's brilliant public relations maneuver that brought the president to Chautauqua. In conversation with Dr. Flood, pastor of the First Methodist Church in Jamestown, Dr. Vincent proposed inviting the president to visit the assembly during the approaching season. Dr. Flood recognized the wisdom of the idea. The assembly had opened the previous year with noteworthy success. A presidential visit would provide invaluable publicity to the fledgling organization. Dr. Vincent was confident the president would accept. The president would not have forgotten the considerable debt of gratitude he owed to Dr. Vincent for his attentions at a time of crisis. The eminent clergyman had been Mr. Grant's pastor in Galena, Illinois, before the war. Mr. Grant had become disillusioned with the military life. On the threshold of a promising career, he had resigned his commission. For months, he had been eking out a miserable existence, clerking at his father's dry goods store. Providing adequately for his family was proving difficult. The intemperances for which he would become notorious were escalating. With patience and solicitude, Dr. Vincent kept them in check until the war arrived. Armed with a letter of introduction, Dr. Flood delivered the invitation to the president's summer cottage at Long Branch. The president readily accepted. Complications arose, however, over arrangements for the visit. The president refused to take lunch with Senator Fenton at Walnut Grove. As the day approached, its promise energized the village. The Journal took note. The president's visit. Preparations for the President's visit are nearly complete. The village has been washed clean, and the business district is resplendent in red, white, and blue. 2 large hemlock arches, through which the presidential party will pass, have been erected over Main Street. The President will arrive Saturday on the noon train. He will proceed by carriage from the depot to the home of Mr. Kent, where a sumptuous reception has been scheduled. The Josie Belle has won the honor of conducting the President up the lake to the Assembly grounds. We learn that Senator Fenton is to occupy a place at the President's table, the President's visit. About 2 o'clock, the party were conveyed to the steamboat landing. The Josie Belle was beautifully adorned with hundreds of flowers and streamers hung from the upper deck, the work of the Clotho Society, which very well may be the precursor to the Marvin House people. The Olivia and Nereus steamed along on either side and slightly behind. The President rode in a single chair placed in the stern to provide an unfettered view of the lake. At his side stood Vice President Wilson and his son, Ulysses Jr. A large crowd of well-wishers lined the banks of the Assembly grounds, and at the approach of the Josie Belle, Dr. Vincent's band struck up, "Hail to the Chief." The President responded to Dr. Flood's introduction in a few terse remarks. He was immediately followed by Dr. Vincent, who delivered the grand address of welcome, at the conclusion of which the President was presented with 2 beautiful Bibles, the second for Mrs. Grant. The President bowed his thanks, but said nothing. Some have expressed surprise that on the reception of the Bibles, he did not make a little speech expressing thanks. Those sitting near, seeing the great tears welling out of his eyes and coursing down his war-scarred cheeks, wanted no thanks expressed in words. The natural reserve had slipped again. By any consideration, the cigars were more appropriate. The tent adjacent to Mr. Miller's cottage, prepared for the President, is made of alternate white and blue striped material. It is large enough to accommodate several families and is richly furnished within. The yard has been beautifully decorated with multitudes of Chinese lanterns hung upon the trees. The President, we are informed, rested comfortably throughout the evening.